Okay, you need to hear this story because it's a legal thriller that honestly sounds stranger than fiction. It's a story where a convicted fraudster ends up walking away from a massive billion-pound lawsuit, and the victim, a whole country, gets left with the bill. So how on earth is that even possible? Let's get into it.
The number at the heart of all this is just staggering. We're talking about 1.4 billion pounds. That's what the Danish tax authority, known as Skat, was trying to get back in what turned out to be one of the biggest civil cases in UK history.
And what happened? After a massive 18-month trial, after years of prep, and after spending millions and millions on legal fees, the UK High Court delivered its verdict, and it all came down to a single, crushing word. The whole thing was just thrown out.
Now, this is where it gets really, really weird. The man Denmark was suing, he'd already been convicted for this exact same fraud back in his home country. Even the UK judge in this case called the guy untrustworthy and obvious liar. So the billion-dollar question is, how did Denmark's case completely fall apart? That's the paradox we're going to unpack right now.
So, to solve this mystery, we've got to start with the scheme itself. It's got a technical name, Cum-ex trading, but honestly, it's easier to think of it as a huge money glitch, like an exploit somebody found in the financial system's code.
Basically, these Cum-ex schemes were a super clever trading strategy. They were built to exploit a loophole that let them trick governments into paying out the exact same tax refund, but to multiple people, over and over again. It was a financial sleight of hand that siphoned billions out of state funds all across Europe.
So how did they pull this off? Well, it was like a four-step dance. First, traders would frantically buy and sell massive amounts of shares right when a company was about to pay out its dividends. All this chaos was designed to do one thing: create confusion. It made it almost impossible to know who really owned the shares at the crucial moment. And that confusion was everything. It let lots of different people all step up and claim they were owed a tax rebate on those shares. And the result? The government ends up paying out multiple refunds for a tax that was only paid one time.
So that's the scheme. Now let's meet the two main opponents who squared off in this billion-dollar courtroom drama. You've got the alleged mastermind on one side and the state that lost a fortune on the other.
All right, on the left, you've got Sanjay Shah. Remember, the UK judge flat out called him untrustworthy, and he's now serving a 12-year sentence in Denmark for this. But then, on the right, you've got Skat, the Danish tax agency. And what did the court say about them? That their internal controls were, and this is a quote, flimsy. In fact, they processed over 4,000 of these refund claims, and it turns out not a single one of them was even valid under Danish law.
And let's be crystal clear about this. Back in Denmark, this wasn't some legal gray area. After a long fight, Sanjay Shah was extradited from Dubai, he was convicted, and he's now serving the longest sentence for financial crime in the history of Denmark. And that fact right there is what makes the UK court's decision to just dismiss the civil case so mind-boggling.
Okay, let's head back to that UK courtroom, because the judge's final ruling is where we find the key to this whole paradox. Why did a case against a convicted fraudster, a man the judge himself called a liar, just completely and utterly fail?
So first off, Justice Andrew Baker made it perfectly clear what he thought of Sanjay Shah. He said his testimony was packed with implausible claims and obvious lies. So, this wasn't a case of some smooth-talking con man pulling the wool over the court's eyes. The judge was not fooled at all. And here it is. This is the answer. The judge ruled that Skat, the Danish tax agency, had failed to legally prove that it was deceived. And why not? Because its own internal systems, the checks and balances for approving these refunds, were, in the judge's own words, so flimsy as to be almost non-existent.
So here's that big aha moment. From a legal point of view, the court decided you can't really claim to be deceived if you have practically no systems in place to check for deception in the first place. The money wasn't lost because of some brilliant, sophisticated plot. It was lost because the door to the vault was left wide open, with the key sitting right there in the lock. It was a total failure of the system itself.
But hold on, because this story is far from over. The verdict in the UK, that was just one battle in a much bigger and way more expensive war. So, what's next?
Well, the fallout from this is just huge. First off, the Danish government is, no surprise, appealing the verdict. The legal bills for this one trial alone could hit hundreds of millions of pounds. And, get this, the whistleblower who helped expose the whole scheme has finally been cleared after he himself was sued by Skat. Wild! But the biggest thing is the warning this sends to tax agencies everywhere. You better tighten up your controls or you could be next. And yeah, Denmark is still going after related cases in other countries too.
So this whole insane case leaves us with a really tough question. You have a man in prison for fraud, and yet the civil case to get the money back failed because the victim's own system was too broken to even be considered deceived. It really makes you stop and think, right? When a system fails that badly, who's really responsible and who ends up paying the price?